Welcome to our program tonight. We have a surfeit of programs today at Stanford. We had another program that began at 4:30. Some of you, I know, attended there. I was also there. We were talking about the images and voices of Iranian women and women in the Middle East. There is a wonderful exhibit at Cantor. If you haven't seen it, I strongly suggest you go. Three scholars were talking about those images and the emerging voices of women in the Middle East. One of them, Dominique Brookshaw, will be giving another talk tomorrow at 1 o'clock in Encino Hall, in the Philippines room in Encino Hall Central, talking about, again, women's voices in Iran, how they like to be heard and seen. The talk will be in English. Dominique Brookshaw has done some really remarkable work on introducing woman voices, woman poets, woman writers of Iran in 19th century and early 20th century. Before I introduce our guest tonight, I want to tell you about an event that we just got finished organizing. If you go on our website, you will see the details of it. This is an event that will take place April 26th at 6 p.m. It will be in the NVI Nevidya Auditorium at Stanford. It is called An Evening with Iranian Scholars. It is an event that we organized, the Iranian Studies, with the help of Stanford's Persian Student Association. And we have been planning this now for about a year. And we thought that people, particularly in our community, don't know how many different professors or scholars are doing really fascinating work at Stanford University, from neuroscience to engineering, from Iranian theater to Iranian politics. So we got 10 of them, Professors Arbabian, Beyzai, Mani, Muqaddam, who is Stanford Board of Trustees, member of the Stanford Board of Trustees. Hamid Muqaddam was endowed our program and my position. Ali Mani, Parviz Moin, Joseph Parvizi, Amin Sabiri, Amir Safavi Naini, Yahya Tabesh, Behnam Tabrizi. These are from a wide range of different domains. I will be there as well. We will be each talking about what it is that we do at Stanford. The program will be in Persian, and it is intended to give a sense to the wider community of the multiplicities of things that are happening here by this range of professors and scholars. Our guest tonight, Professor Soli Shahvar, comes from Haifa. He's traveled far to be with us. We've been trying to get him to come here for about, I think, a year. Finding a time that works for him and worked for us has proven to be difficult. He is the head of the Center for Iran and Persian Gulf Studies at the University of Haifa. He's a professor at that university. He has written extensively on Iranian culture politics, Israeli culture politics, Iran and Israel relations. And then I think this is his dissertation on the role of the Baha'i schools in early education in Iran. One of those topics that has been little discussed before his work. His work is, in a sense, a pioneering work of scholarship. There is a film about these schools, and we had an opportunity to maybe show it, but because we had announced the program to be an English program and there was no subtitles for it, we did not end up showing it. We were going to show clips of it, but in the program, in the film, I haven't seen the film yet, but I hear that one of the sources for the film is the scholar who is here tonight. So without the film, we have the scholar that is the original source of many of these stories. So please join me in welcoming Professor Shahvar. Please turn off your phones.
Good evening. I'm heard? Well, not good? Does it go up or? Okay. It's a pleasure.
It comes from your mic.
Oh, it's the mic.
So if
Okay.
you put it a little higher.
Put it that way. Okay. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish to thank Dr. Milani for inviting me to this place, to this honored place and prestigious academic center. And I would like also to thank Mrs. Pasang Sherpa, who took care of all the administration. And just a correction, it's not my dissertation. My dissertation was on the advent of telegraphy into the Middle East.
Oh.
But it's a topic that I found it quite interesting after after participating, not actively but passively among the audience in the first international conference on the Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Baha'i religion that was a result of a chair that was given to the Hebrew University, chaired by Professor Moshe Sharon, regarding Baha'i studies. And when they announced that conference and I heard about the things, the different, was 3 days conference, and they announced that the next international conference is going to be in Landeck, Switzerland, and the theme of it would be education. So I was brainstorming with myself, I want to participate, but what I'm going to present, and then the question of the role of the Baha'is and in education by schools, stuff like that, came to my mind, and I started to, the more I delved into it, I saw that there is no mention of any Baha'i schools. Then the question came to myself is, how come the biggest religious minority in Iran is not mentioned? You have the Jews, the Christians, the Zoroastrians, but no mention of the Baha'is, and of course their schools. Then there must be something here, and from that started, I would say 2 books by now and a number of articles. So that's the story behind this thing. So with your permission, I will start. Modernity, the Baha'i faith, and the question of modern education in late Qajar and early Pahlavis, which is more or less the period, the span of period that the Baha'i schools operated in Iran. So when we talk about modernity in Iran, we can say, to sum up, ideas of modernity came from various channels. I mentioned few. Contact with the West. The contact with the West raised the issue of the superiority of the West over the Islamic states, in this case Iran, and from that the question came after that, what we can do in order to bridge the gap with the West. It was in the field of military, the first major clash, you know, about the Iran-Russia wars at the beginning of the 19th century. Another channel was the diplomatic contact, consular ambassadors and the staff of diplomatic embassies from Western countries on the daily basis, growing more contacts with the local people. Economic, mainly concessions and loans that came along, mainly in the second part of 19th century. Cultural contacts, here, of course, we can see a lot of influence from different directions, but mainly French, for example. That's why, for example, up to the 60s, after the 1960s, we have a major French cultural influence in Iran. Educational, which we will talk about it today more in detail. The education was, of course, the various schools and that were established in Iran by foreign organizations and movements, and of course religious. For example, if we talk about the missionary schools, there is contact with another religion which is not your religion, if you are not a Christian, of course. For example, my father, I'm not a Baha'i, I'm a Jewish, so my father studied in Isfahan in an American Presbyterian school. So in his way, he was in contact with a Christian, and like himself, many others studied in various religious schools. And I know, for example, Iranians that studied, non-Jewish Iranians that studied in the Alliance Israélite Universelle, the French Jewish movement. So the contacts were multi-dimensional, multilateral. Ideas of modernity also came from inside Iran. We know about reform-minded state officials, such as Abbas Mirza, the governor of Azerbaijan, who died in 1833, Mirza Abul Qasim Qaim Maqam, his premier, and other premier like Amir Kabir, Moshir al-Dawleh, Amin al-Dawleh, etc. There were also returning Iranians from Western countries. Iranians that went to the West either to do business or to study and came back. They came with their own load of not only vocabulary, new vocabulary, but also impressions, cultural effects. And I give here a number of examples like Mirza Saleh Shirazi, Mirza Mustafa Afshar, and many others. Also Iranian intellectuals, some of whom were influenced by Western ideas, whether by going to the West or reading about the West. And here also the number are quite a lot, such as Abu Talib Isfahani, Mirza Malcolm Khan Nazim al-Dawleh, Abdul Rahim Talibov Tabrizi, Mirza Yusuf Khan Mustashar al-Dawleh, Mirza Fathali Azunzadeh, and there are a lot of others. Influence of Western ideas came also through the written word, whether it is the press, whether it is books that were either written by locals or translated. And also communication technology played a major factor here in bringing ideas from the West. I mentioned steam engine mainly because through the steam engine the news came faster, and more so with the electric telegraph. So these also had their own influence. The influence of other Muslim countries. We see that Iran is secluded in a way in the east, in the eastern part of the Middle East. Divided from Europe by the vast territories of Ottoman Empire, which was hostile mostly to Iran. So ideas came usually much later to Iran. But in a way, Iran being a Shiite country, at least some thinkers or some statesmen in Iran actually thought that if the Ottomans can modernize the Sunni Ottomans, then we can do it also. So this was kind of brought it from a higher level of this is far from us to something more tangible that we can do it as well. And of course the Babi and Baha'i, the Babi movement and the Baha'i faith, which had, in my view, a vast influence in Iran since the middle of the 19th century, but unfortunately has been disregarded entirely. So here we can talk about modern ideas such as monogamy, unveiling, emancipation of women, permission to take riba or interest on commercial transactions, globalization, universal education, equality between people, the rule of law, limitation of the absolute rule, human rights, and many more ideas, modern ideas that actually are mentioned in the Baha'i writings. I gave here two examples, Kitab al-Aqdas by Baha'u'llah and The Secret of Divine Civilization by his son Abdul Baha, which has which actually is a treatise in order to in which there is a lot of ideas how Iran could be promoted, and there are some studies already done, like Juan Cole study and a number of other studies that actually do prove or do indicate the influence of this treatise on ideas of other intellectuals which don't quote Secret of Divine Civilization as the source of their thoughts. So here you go. Now, the role of modern education, of course, it's in the modernization process of Iran, it's one of the most important pillars. I mentioned before that there was the people were asking about the source of superiority or the secret of superiority of the West. One of those was actually the education, the Western education, which needs to be imitated. And there are a number of intellectuals, Iranian intellectuals, that talked about this. Like, for example, Mirza Malkol Khan mentioned this, modern schools as the Karkhane Adam Sazi, or something like that. That it's a place that it makes the modern person that is capable to actually live and accommodate in the modern world. And there was, of course, the need to produce local qualified cadres for the different fields of reform during, from mid-19th century onwards. Well, in the Baha'i faith, the education has a very important place. It's, first of all, it's a religious duty. And that's a major thing to understand. It's a religious duty to educate yourself and your children. And among the children, there is a preference over the women, because women are going to actually educate the next generation. It is with the mother that that the kids grow, not the father. Father is usually out of home. So the role of between the two, the importance of education for girls, it's very important. And in the Baha'i faith, through the education, you can understand by yourself, not by intermediary, what the writings, the holy writings, are actually telling you to do. You don't need these ulama, alim, yes, all these clerics in order to interpret it for you. So, in a way, it negates this class of the ulama or the mujtahids. And therefore, this is one of the basics of the hatred or the opposition of the Shia clerics toward the Baha'is in Iran. Now, regarding the advent of modern schools into Qajar Iran, well, there was a traditional schooling that we know about, the maktab or madrasa, yes, the traditional schooling, which didn't have any modern content, mainly religious in content. And it happened also, it took place also in the Muslim and as well as the religious minority communities. In early modern schools in Iran, usually we are talking about the missionary schools, which started to operate in mid-1830s in Iran, first by American Presbyterian, the French Lazarite Catholics, and then the British Anglican, which had also a branch that called the Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews, because all these missions, different missions, actually, they were rivals, because they were actually trying to convert as much as possible of people from other religions and within the Christian communities from one school, for example, from Presbyterian to Anglican, and from the Catholic to the Presbyterian, and likewise. So there were some rivalry within the Christian community as well. And as far as we know is that up to the 1870s, most of the activity of the foreign missionary schools were among the Christian community, and gradually from the 1870s onward we see them entering also the Muslim Shiites. There were also the state-run schools initiated by the state, such as the Dar al-Funun and Dar al-Funun Tehran, Dar al-Funun Tabriz, and then we have the School of Ulum al-Siyasi and Dar al-Tarjameh, and there's a number of them. But those were limited mainly to the aristocracy and didn't respond to the needs of the of Iran itself. We know that Iran was at the beginning of the 20th century, Iran is about 10 million people. At the beginning of the 19th century, something about 6 million people. So we are talking state schools that actually didn't respond to the needs of such a growing population. So these were, I know they were already, as I said, they were limited to aristocracy, the children of the aristocracy. Foreign cultural education organization like Alliance Française or Alliance Israeli Universelle, as I mentioned before, and also local private-run schools. More towards the end of the 19th century, we see, for example, the activity of Anjuman Ma'arif, which is translated as the education society led by Amin al-Dawleh. And here we see some initiatives by Muslim, some of them merchants, some of them other people that were actually establishing modern schools run by Muslims, initiated by Muslims. And then foreign minority educational organization, and here we talk about Jews, which is Alliance Israeli Universelle, Zoroastrians, mainly initiated by the Zoroastrians in India, from Mumbai, and the Baha'is. Now, when we're talking about the Baha'is and the school of Baha'is, I can ask, regard this respect in Iran, within the time span that I mentioned at the beginning, is they raised three fundamental questions. Why the first Baha'i school was established in 1899 in Tehran. So the question raises is why Muzaffaruddin Shah, who ruled Iran at that time, or was the king at that time, not so much ruled over the whole country, why did he and the later Qajari monarchs establish or permitted the establishment of Baha'i schools? Because after all, as we know, the Baha'is were persecuted horrifiedly since the beginning of the Baha'i movement, or a few years after the beginning of the Baha'i movement, definitely from 1848 and onwards, by the state and the ulama. So how come the state is giving those Baha'is who are actually not recognized by Islam and opposed by both the state and the ulama to open schools? It's a striking issue. And then on the end of this operation of this school, we can ask, why did Reza Shah Pahlavi, who had much in common with some Baha'i ideas, close those schools? As we know, Reza Shah was a nationally secular statesman, opposed to the clerics, the Shia clerics, modernizing, westernizing, things that very much corresponded to the ideas of the Baha'is. So why he was the one that closed the schools? And then what conclusions could we derive regarding the current historiography on modern Iran from this example of education? Well, referring to question number one, I think about a number of reasons. And in my view, the main reason for opening or permitting the opening of Baha'i schools is the process of reform in Iran in general and in education in particular. There was growing pressure from below for modern education, which meant for many the ladder for better job, or from those who are in a bad economic situation for the child to actually take the family out of their misery and the poverty to bring it to a better position, because a better job would probably produce a better income, and of course it would improve the life of those of his family. The state wasn't able probably to produce a state-run system, educational system, like Reza Shah did later in the 1820s, and 30s. So in this way, probably the Qajar Shahs permitted all, or whoever was could actually pay for establishing schools to establish schools. That's why, for example, we have, as I mentioned before, a number of Muslim initiatives for opening schools, and the permission for example, the Jews to operate this Alliance Israélite Universitaire in 1898, a year before the Baha'is, could be an indication of kind of liberation or liberalizing attitude towards the opening of schools or modern schools by minorities as well. Support from reform-minded figures. Probably there were a lot of people who are, as we said before, intellectuals and others, politicians, statesmen, high officials that were supporting reforms in general and the establishment of modern schools in particular. Then, of course, they were for such an initiative. Again, among those officials, there were a lot of people who were either Baha'is, proclaimed Baha'is, disguised Muslims, but Baha'is, and also Muslims that liked the ideas of the Baha'is. There were in the different documents, for example, from the Brown archives and from, E.G. Brown, Edward Granville Brown, or from the Russian archives, the Russian officer Alexander Tumansky, who came in the 1890s to Iran and made an investigation of the Baha'is in Iran and also of Ashgabat on the other side of the border. He found out, for example, that there are governors, tribal leaders, 2 Bakhtiari tribal leaders he mentions. There is also an Arab tribal leader, and many high officials that are Baha'is. And actually, there is a lot of discussion regarding the number of Baha'is in Iran. So the range goes from something 100,000 in this period, end of 19th century, to Tumansky even mentioned maybe 1 million, 1/10 of the population. So there is a lot of obscurity here between that's what explains the range, but it means that they had a major influence in the community. Baha'i connections with Western countries who had much influence in Iran, Britain, Russia, France, and also the United States. With all of them, the Baha'i community and leadership maintained good relations. They were courted, for example, from the beginning, the Bab and later Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha by Russians, and there were contact with the British. Also, to some extent, also France and also United States. The United States was from the 1903 and onwards, from the beginning of 20th century. But all those powers, European powers or Western powers, had definitely could have played some role in promoting this establishment of schools. Actually, in Tumansky that I mentioned earlier, he actually mentions that in the policymaking, imperial policymaking group of the Russian Empire, of the Tsarist Russian Empire, there were those like Baron Rosen, who was the leading scholar of Baha'i studies in Russia. There were some people that were actually thinking of Baha'is as a protege, as Russian protege, with whom they can actually influence more within Iran, have more influence in Iran because of those many Baha'is in high places. So as a tool for improving their position versus Britain and versus other powers in Iran. There is some indication also about Muzaffar ad-Din Shah's weak character, contradictory to his father Nasr ad-Din Shah, that this may have played some role in not opposing too much the establishment of Baha'i schools. And also there was, by the end of the 19th century, a more lenient and relaxed atmosphere towards the Baha'is. since the last years of Nasruddin Shah's rule, and to this even indicates Baha'u'llah himself. Before he died in 1892, he says in one of these tablets that Nasruddin Shah has been, during his recent years or last years, quite more, I don't want to say liberal, but more moderate toward the Baha'is. By the end of the 19th century, we also see that there was more and more distinction between the disobedient and subversive Babis versus the obedient and the loyal Baha'is. If you look at the literature throughout the entire 19th century, they always mix. They call it all of them Babis. But by the end of 19th century, it was more or less clear who is the Babis, and from that developed the Azalis as well, and the Baha'is, which are more, as I said, more obedient and loyal to the state, and less violent, because in 1852 it were Babis that were tried to assassinate Nasruddin Shah. Didn't succeed. Baha'i schools were registered, and this is very important. Baha'i schools were, once the state agreed to permit the establishment of Baha'i schools, they were not registered as Baha'i schools. But for example, some Baha'i, Iranian Baha'i who wanted to open schools, so he got Mirza such and such, got permission to open schools. There is no mention of him being a Baha'i. So in this way, actually, the state didn't recognize the community, and in a way also try to minimize or to disguise the opposition of those who opposed to such establishment of Baha'i schools. What interest the Baha'is had in this period for opening their own schools? Well, we mentioned that before, importance of education in Baha'i faith, which is a religious duty, so that's for example, so it means that it always existed. But in this period, there was probably a ripe time to propel the Baha'i community in Iran from obscurity into the open. There was a period of change, period of pre-constitutionalism in Iran. Constitutional revolution started in 1905, and with all these anjumans and associations, secret societies at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, this probably was a good opportunity for, in the eyes of the leadership of the Baha'is, to make a move in that direction. And of course, the schools could be a tool for propagation of their faith among the majority Shia population as well as the religious minority communities. What characteristics these schools had? Well, first of all, very important, which didn't happen with other schools, is that they didn't have any religious studies in the curriculum. For example, the missionaries had religious studies. The Jewish Alliance Israélite Universelle had, although 1 hour per week, but there was 1 hour per week religious Jewish studies. In the Baha'i schools, they made it, they were persistent not to include any religious studies. Baha'i religious studies were only on Fridays, where the schools are in recess and closed, and the Baha'i schools, the Baha'i children came to study in the schools only in what they call the Kelasai Darse Akhlaq, the moral classes, where they teach moral issues as well as the teachings of the leaders of the faith. The Baha'i schools also followed the curriculum of the Ministry of Education. It means that they didn't bring about a new curriculum. They followed this very much suits their obedience of the state program and of state rules. They kept a relatively high standard in teaching staff, which was Baha'i and therefore motivated by religious duty. Teaching accessory, for example, you could see at the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, schools that have wall maps, libraries, laboratories, skeleton for anatomy classes, foreign magazine in order to study English, and different things. They had also enrichment classes beyond what I said before, what the Ministry of Education actually orders to be taught. They had enrichment classes like gymnastics. We know that gymnastics as a state level was introduced only during the Reza Shah period. Embroidery, for example, for girls, theater shows, which actually they played and they invited the local aristocracy and the local, shall we say, important people like the head of police and stuff like that, people like that to the theater, and they sold tickets. So different enrichment activities. They also encouraged excellence. They had in the Baha'i schools the Dah, Sad, and Hezar Afarin. So Hezar Afarin being the highest, of course, for the most excellent student, but there was an encouragement process which was very important in order for the students to try to get better marks and try harder. They also followed the local practices as to separation of sexes, outdoor appearance, etc. It means that they came with a chador, left with a chador. As far as there was no, the unveiling hasn't started yet. It started in 1936, as we know from Reza Shah period, but until then they kept the rule of the social habits and the practices. And they were staffed, which is very important, staffed almost entirely by Iranians. The Alliance Israelite, there were many Jewish, but from France. The missionaries were, of course, either from France, from United States, from United Kingdom and elsewhere. So they were foreigners for the children, but the Baha'is were Iranians, whether born as Baha'is or they converted to the Baha'is, to the Baha'i faith. But they were Iranians speaking the language, looking the same as the people, so there was no immediate distinction. Now we go number two, the question number two, why Reza Shah Pahlavi closed the Baha'i schools? In spite of the Baha'i support to some core ideas of the Shah, such as modernization, emancipation of women, obedience to the state, anti-clericalism, and etc. I would start with what is written as the official reason for the closure of the Baha'i schools in December 1934. The official reason was the Baha'is are not a recognized religion in Iran. In other words, they are like other Iranians, except for those Zoroastrian Jews and Christians who are recognized religions. Therefore, they should not close their schools in their holidays, which doesn't correlate to the holidays of the state. So having closed once in 1933, and the state warned them, and once they again closed on 1934 the school, the Reza Shah ordered the closure of the, not all the schools, but all the Baha'i schools that were closed on that day. I'm mentioning this in order to say that, to reiterate this position, this point, that in my view, Reza Shah was an anti-Baha'i. He hated those who disobeyed his rules. So therefore he closed all those Baha'i schools that were closed on that day, and not all the Baha'i schools were closed on that day. Some of them remained open, and the reason is because the head of the main Baha'i schools in Tehran, the Tarbiyat school, which had Banin for boys and Banat for girls, two branches. He was very afraid that this rule of Shoghi Effendi, who sits in Haifa in Israel, and ordered the Baha'i schools to close on the Ayyam Muharrameh, the holy days of the holidays of the Baha'is. And he said, listen, we had already one warning, if we are going to close, there might be closure. And then Shoghi Effendi's response was actually, no, go ahead and close the thing. So the telegram that the Shoghi Effendi sent to head of the Baha'i school in Tehran didn't reach in time for many other schools. So those who remained open actually were forgiven, but the next year they were closed because of they followed the rule. So other possible reasons for closing the Baha'i schools by Reza Shah. I mentioned the first one, that they disregarded the previous warning. The election of the first National Spiritual Assembly on the 26th of April 1934. If you try to get into the state of mind of somebody like Reza Shah, and it is 1934. It is the year that the resumption of communist activity in Iran. Because Arani and all these fellows ran from Germany because of Hitler, came to Iran and started to reactivate the communist activity in Iran. And of course, communist activity in Iran didn't start in 1934, but it was before. So he knew, he was aware of such organizations that have establishments, that are creating, for example, institutions of their own, and he was wary of those organizations. And for him, probably, to establish a national spiritual assembly nationwide, yes, that meant that, be careful from these guys who might be trying to do something. Anti-Baha'i elements in the Baha'i state, in the Pahlavi state, most notably Baha'i literature very much indicate to Muhammad Ali Furughi, who was prime minister at the time, who actually is quoted to have said that the Baha'i schools were a weapon to convert non-Baha'is to the Baha'i faith, therefore their schools need to shut down. Growing suspicion of Reza Shah, yes, I related to it a little bit earlier, Baha'i universalism versus Pahlavi nationalism. In other words, the Baha'is are adhering to somebody who is out of Iran, and by thus they are actually disregarding the head of state in Iran, which is Reza Shah. For him, of course, it was something that he could not agree to. And Baha'i religious versus Reza Shah's secular application of education, I think this was a minor factor, but still needs to be mentioned. Baha'i contacts and good relations with foreign elements, especially the British, who actually gave Abdullah in 1920 the knighthood for all his efforts in Palestine, actually, which was, if we know the sensitivity of Iranians and Iranian leaders to British designs. So this was also probably the close relations of Baha'is with the British may have played a minor role as well. The size of Baha'i community, here he has, usually, for example, the Jews were in ghettos, the Christians were in their own neighborhood, but here we have a religious minority that its geographical spread is all over, and it is institutionalized on the local level, on the national level, so it could be something that the Reza Shah might have noticed, a person as the Reza Shah was. The large attendance of Muslim students at Baha'i schools. We have some Baha'i schools that even the number of Muslim students is either equal and even a little bit more than the Baha'is. So this might have also alarmed the Shah. What would happen if you take a number of these things together? For example, Furughi is telling him also, be aware, the schools are used, they intended to convert the non-Baha'is, and here he sees a widespread. So these things might have played some role in closing the Baha'i schools as a preemptive act. sacrificed in domestic power game. The Baha'is also were usually the one community within Iran that were usually sacrificed in the power rivalry between the state and the Shia clerics. So it could have been that before Reza Shah wanted to introduce some more radical reforms, such as the unveiling of women, he wanted to give the clerics something in order to shut them up. Could be. So this was also a factor that may have been playing in this decision to close the Baha'i schools. Actually, to this issue refers also Hushang Shahabi in his article in the very good volume, a collection of articles on the Baha'is and their socio-historical studies on the Baha'is, edited by the very same Burukshah that you mentioned and Sina Fazil. Imitating the Turkish model. We know also that Reza Shah was very kind of following the matters that happened in Turkey under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and much of the reforms done in Turkey, he imitated them and implemented them in Iran. And there are actually a certain column in the Iranian newspaper that they were saying what is happening in Turkey on these issues. So the Turks, Atatürk actually closed those schools also in Turkey, so this might have also some influence on Reza Shah's decision to close the schools. Now here I show you a number of photos from of Baha'i schools. For example, this is the Ta'id Boys School in Hamadan in 1908. There are a number of those photos. Here the graduation intermediate students at the Ta'id Boys Schools. No date, but late Qajar. By the way, all the photos are the courtesy of the Baha'i War Center. The Ta'id Boys Schools in Hamadan, late Qajar period. Madraseh Mubarakeh Ta'id. If you look at this and you see it cut a little bit, but Ta'id Boys School again in 1925. The very same people. Oh, sorry. And here there is a full photo with the title there. Again, Ta'id Boys School. Now this was there is a Russian writing on the side, so this could have been a Baha'i school in either Ashgabat or Baku, somewhere like that. By the way, the first Baha'i schools, the modern Baha'i schools, was established in Ashgabat in 1897. This is the management committee of the Tehran Tarbiyat School, 1932. This is a group of pupils at the Tehran Tarbiyat Girls School, and the center with the dark dress is Princess Ashraf Pahlavi, who actually with her brother studied in elementary school in the Tarbiyat. Here we see the involvement of American Baha'is into the schools in Iran, the Baha'i schools in Iran. In the middle with the impressive hat, Dr. Suzanne Moody, which actually, when she died, the Iranian newspapers also mentioned her death. She was quite a figure. Here, students at the Dars Akhlaq for girls. These moral classes in Tehran. This is after the closure of the schools in 1939, but the Dars Akhlaq, the moral classes kept. It wasn't the regular school. English class, Tarbiyat Boys School. Also the writing is in English. There on the blackboard. A group of Baha'i women and children attending the Women's Emancipation Celebration in the Save branch of the Ministry of Education, 1930s, mid-1930s, probably after the unveiling rule. Here we see the picture of Reza Shah on top, a Baha'i girls' school. Ceremony for granting certificates of excellence to students. This is Wahdat Bashar Boys' School in Kashan, 1930. The Pahlavi hat is seen, of course, very visibly by the people wearing it. Student and staff at the Wahdat Bashar Boys' School in Kashan in 1909. And student and teachers, second grade classes from Tarbiyat Boys' School, Tehran, probably late Qajar. This is what I referred to earlier, the gymnastics classes. Ceremony at the Tarbiyat Boys' School in Tehran, which actually was adjacent to the Royal Palace. And in a short conversation that I had with Professor Amin Banani, who passed away regrettably, he told me that in his view, one of the reasons was that actually Reza Shah wanted this territory of the school, so he ordered the school to be closed. It's not a new thing with Reza Shah, taking the pieces of land, but I don't know. The Tawakkol Girls' School in Qazvin, of course, with the sign of Ya Baha wal Abha that we can see, 1928. And again, the sign is up there, the Tawakkol Boys' School in Qazvin, Tarbiyat Boys' Schools. And I don't want to go into this, but a lot of famous people are here among the children. For example, I don't remember which, but in my book is written, one of those is Manucher Farman Farmayan, one of Farman Farmayan family, which actually, according to Mujan Momen, the father was a Qajar prince. He was a Baha'i. He converted to Baha'i. I read, for example, the book of his daughter, Satare Farman Farman, and she is very positive toward the Baha'i faith in her book. Student at the sport class in the Baha'i Tarbiyat Boys' School. 6th grade Tarbiyat Boys' School in Tehran. The same. This is the 5th grade. This is Dars Akhlaq class in Tarbiyat Elementary Boys' School. This is actually the letter sent by Ali Asghar Hikmat, was the acting Minister of Education at the time, to manager head of the Tarbiyat Boys' School, ordering to close the Baha'i Tarbiyat Boys' School. These are the certificates given to students. For example, a sample of grade sheet, Karname, students Tehran Tarbiyat High School, 1917. So you have here Quran, Shariat, Farsi, Arabi, Adabiyat, Tarikh Iran, Tarikh Umumi, Tarikh Anbiya, Ta'alimat Madaniye, Ilm wa Ashya, Zaban, Hisab, Hendese, Geografia, Jabr Muqabale, Physique, Shimi, Tarikh Tabi'i, Mashq Khat, Siyaq, Rasm Naqashi, Gymnastic. Yes, all these different issues, different fields. This is on the other side in English, so it was very important to have the bilingual. Of course, this is the star with the 9, what do you say, the 9 points, which is symbols the Baha'i, one of the Baha'i symbols, the numbers of 9 and 19th. Here, Saadat Milli Boys' School in Najafabad, 1934. Saadat Milli Girls' School in Najafabad. The same school in 1934 with the sign Ya Baha wal Abha there. And we get to question number 3. If you remember, it was what conclusion could be derived regarding the activity of the Baha'i schools in Iran and the current historiography on modern Iran in general and in the field of modern education in particular. Well, First of all, the Baha'i schools formed the first laboratory in modern Iran for intercommunal contact, where Muslims sat and studied under the same roof and on quite equal terms alongside Jewish, Zoroastrian, and Baha'i children. The Baha'i schools provided education facilities not only in major urban cities, but also in remote places, wherever there was a Baha'i community, of course, where there was no state-run or any other schools. So in other words, in the circumstances that there is no state-run schools by the Qajars, later there was in the Pahlavi period, but even in the Pahlavi period there wasn't a school everywhere. So in certain places there was only a Baha'i school in that locality. So that's a very important thing. Baha'i schools were attended by children from all socio-economic classes of the local society, from the aristocracy as well as the lower classes, with those in Tehran attended by the children of leading figures from the elite and even the royal family. In the book that I written about the schools, the Forgotten Schools, I titled it Forgotten Schools because they are not mentioned in any study on education in Iran. Although there have been tens and dozens of them. I have a list of a number of Iranians that actually, leading Iranians from leading families that actually studied there, starting with Mohammad Reza Shah and his sister and many other people. And the role of the Baha'is in the field of modern education in Iran stresses the shortcomings of the current historiography in that field, in the field of education, but not only. Likewise, the important role of the Baha'is in other major fields such as governance, practice of democracy, status of women, economy, human rights, health, modernization, etc. A sample of those fields you can see in the book that I mentioned earlier, edited by Brookshaw and Fazel, social-historical studies on the Baha'i issue, the field of women and the field of hygiene and medicine and those stress the shortcomings of current historiography in those fields. And I would say that it is to me a strange thing that you have sources in Persian by the Baha'is, and there is almost, I would say, 98%, I don't know what Professor Milani thinks, but the vast majority of studies on Iran don't use those sources. And not using those sources when we know that they played a major role in those fields, it means that there is a problem with the historiography of modern Iran. Thank you.
Take some questions?
Sure. Please. Yes, please.
Begin. Do we have any estimate on how many students were educated in these schools?
Yes, if you have it, if you have the book,
I do.
I sent you
Yeah.
the Persian one.
Yeah.
So you have you have three, if I remember, three or four appendices. The first appendix, it has all the names of the schools that I traced with the number where there was these data. So there is a huge data there that could be used for another studies. I just did my first shot in this, and there is room for, I think, many more studies in this field. Of course, there is the problem of access to Baha'i sources. What the Baha'i World Center has been done in the, I think, 10 years, something like that. They are loading online, making online a lot of Baha'i sources, but to this point is mainly the holy writings. It's not the sources that, for example, I've seen. This means that you have to get permission to go into the major Baha'i libraries. So it means in Haifa, which is the major one, and it took me a very snail process until I was given the permission to work on those. But there is now a new library that has been opening near Cambridge in the United Kingdom. That was closed for 25 years. They finally found a home for it, and it's open now, but it's not cataloged. So it's a process that it will take probably a number of more decades that it will be more accessible. And I don't know to tell you specific library, non-Baha'i library that has. I think in Leiden they have a good collection, and in Harvard there is also, but it's not the same like so that by itself prevents major studies in this field. Yes, please, you want? Yeah.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your very informative presentation. As you mentioned, the school started at the time of the Muzaffar ibn Shah.
Yes.
You also mentioned that maybe he had a weak character, maybe not as strong. What was the position of the clerics at the time? He being a weak kind of a Shah, and were they in a strong position, and why didn't they oppose, or did they oppose strongly to this, and at the end still they lost the school started?
Yes, there was a major opposition of the clerics, and this is on the national level. But as I said, there were a lot of either Baha'i or pro-Baha'i or pro-reform officials in different places. So your question has to be referred locally. In certain localities, the clerics were more strong, more influenced. They had some influence on the governor, and they closed them, for example, for a short while. And then the Baha'is sent a cable or a telegram to the Tehran, and the Tehran authorities that were there, more pro-Baha'i or Baha'i officials, they pressed the Shah, and the cable came back open. So there was one chapter in my book is the opposition to the Baha'i schools. So there is a lot of cases like I mentioned, but on the local basis. It's not of course, on the national basis, all the clerics were against it, because first of all, it's a post-Muhammadan or post-Islamic religion. So if you say Muhammad is the Khatam al-Anbiya, the last of the prophets, you cannot afford to be another revelation. So by itself, but specifically the fact that through the education, the Baha'is are actually saying that a believer can actually understand the writings by himself and act upon them. He doesn't need these mediators called clerics or mujtahids. This by itself make them an immediate danger to their position in the society. So therefore it's it's a battle for life for the clerics. Yes?
So what happened after the schools were closed? Were there enough other schools that absorbed students, especially for girls in smaller towns?
Yes, we are talking about, of course, the Pahlavi period. So the Baha'is, some Baha'is were kind of didn't know what to do after. So some children lost 1 year of schooling, but most of them actually entered the local, the state system education schools, which weren't close to them, unlike today, for example, which the university level is close to them. So there wasn't a problem for them entering the regular schools. Yes?
Yes, you mentioned this Russian source, Alexander
Tumansky. Alexander Grigorievich Tumansky.
Yes. Could you mention again what was his position or role, and also the sources, the references in connection with the high officials and connected to the Baha'i faith that he mentions? Are those available in English, do you know, or only in Russian?
Well, my second book on this, we have made a 2-volume book on the Russian sources on Baha'i studies, which are all translated and annotated with introduction. It's called The Baha'is of Iran, Transcaspia, and the Caucasus. So you have it in English, you have all the material. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's available. It's by I.B. Tauris in 2011 was published. So yes, please.
He said that after that the Baha'is were not allowed to have any formal education.
But at one point they
No, I didn't say that they didn't have.
they were opposed. So
No, no.
my question is between
No, the Baha'is, schools were closed, but they were permitted to enter the regular schools.
right. So but
By the way, after the Baha'i schools, also other religious minority schools were closed, the missionaries, and they were nationalized in a way. So,
So how did it transition from the Baha'i schools being closed and Baha'is being allowed in other schools to the current situation in Iran of Baha'is not being allowed to attend higher education? Where was the
it's clear to me because the clerics took over the power, and of course, as I said, they were the biggest rivals or the biggest threat to the clerics. There was the Baha'is, and they are fighting them very viciously. So it didn't immediately start with the 1972 with the revolution and establishment of Islamic Republic, but later, of course, they prevented them the entry. Then there was the development of BIHE, the Baha'i, the BHIE, excuse me, the Baha'i Higher Education Institute of Higher Education, so BIHE, and after that this was closed as well. So whatever in order to either prevent the Baha'is to prosper, so throw them to jail, make them flee the country. And there is, of course, a lot of sacrifices made by the Baha'is because, after all, Iran is a sacred country for them because the religion started for them. And the Persian language is also very important because of that. Yes, please.
So this is a personal question for you. You seem to have done a lot of research in this area. You explained why you developed this interest on this topic because you wanted to present Atlantic. And then your interest has continued, and you're continuing to work in this space. I'm curious to know what propels you in this direction, and what
Understand.
are personally of interest to you. And the second part of that is really, what gap do you feel that your work is actually addressing to fill?
Okay. First of all, as a scholar, I mean, all scholars are always looking for something new. I mean, if you go and do research on something that has been extensively researched, so your net contribution is nothing. I mean, so somebody who's after doing a degree, a PhD very quickly, so he goes and does some tricks. That's why you're not talking about that. So you always want, and to me, it was like a black hole. There is a black hole in modern Iranian history called the role of the Baha'is in the community. And this black hole is not addressed because of mainly political issues. So in other words, there are a lot of, I would say, scholars in Iran who want, and in other circumstances I would have probably wanted to do research, but they know if they do research on the Baha'is, then they would be prevented, not given a visa to go in Iran, not to mention cooperation with Iranian scientists and scholars, not to mention access to sources in Iran. So it keeps, this situation, it keeps continuing. So somebody like me, who is Israeli, then there is no problem of going to Iran because it's a one-way street. I don't want to. So for me, I didn't have all this consideration, and the fact that I was in Haifa and the center is there, I approached them, and closely, as I said, it took some time, and they opened to the idea. And so the second one was the second question.
Yeah. So how has your work filled the gap so far? Because you said it's a big, huge black hole.
Yes, I mean in terms
to be chipping away at it.
Yes, in terms of the field of education, I took all the books, articles that has been written about education in Iran before my research. There is no mention of any Baha'i schools. By mistake, a certain book by a lady, I remember her, Farsani, something Farsani, published in 1999 in Iran. She talks about Baha'i, she talks about girls' schools in Iran. And you see in the list that she gives a number of these Baha'i schools, but she doesn't know they are Baha'i. She says Madrasah Tarbiyat. You understand? So, and in other, so here we have few mention of some schools by name without mentioning these are Baha'is, therefore not addressing all this influence. And in other academic books, there is no mention. I think only in the book by Banani from 1961, Stanford University actually, yes, on the modernization of Iran during Reza Shah period, there is 1.5 lines about some Baha'i schools. So there is nothing. So in my respect, I think I've done a lot in order to fill the gap, but as I said, this is only the beginning. There is with more sources coming into light or processing the big data that I have collected, and it's in the book. Other books or article could be written. Yes.
We read in our Baha'i publication by the name of Star of the West,
yes,
or Najm al-Akhtar,
yes,
that Abdul Baha initiated some educational exchanges between Iran and the West,
yes,
particularly United States.
yes.
Martha Ruth going to
That's right.
Iran,
Yes.
Watsiya Khanum coming to America around 1906, and then these activities continued, and by the way, was led by Munira Khanum, Abdul Baha's wife, and then ended with an institution for women in Haifa. I was just wondering if there's remnants of that at all in Haifa, or do you know anything that
There is
any institution in Haifa that got the idea from that?
I don't know of any institutions in Haifa as you describe. I know about these initiatives that there were. It was open, even developed into the Iran-America Society, something like that. That the many teachers came mainly to the Tarbiyat Banat in Tehran, and the number of American educators in the Tarbiyat was quite a lot, especially the girls' school. But there is I don't know of any such institution today in Haifa or in any parts of Israel. What there is in Haifa is the main institution of the Baha'is, the Baha'i World Center, with the Universal House of Justice as a leadership body, and the holy places in Acre. And I have a PhD student who is doing research on the Baha'i settlements in Palestine, or in the land of Israel, as the other version. And he concentrating mainly on the settlements that were east of the Lake Kinneret. If you know Israel a little bit, Lake Tiberias, what they call Lake Tiberias. And there were a number of villages, and there is very interesting because, for example, I said that there is a black hole. So in Land of Israel Studies, there is such field, Land of Israel Studies. In the Land of Israel Studies, there is no mention of any sources, Baha'i sources, while we know, for example, that these Baha'i lands were coveted by the Zionist movement, and they finally bought it this way or another from the Baha'is. So there is a big role, or a hidden part of the Land of Israel Studies that was revealed by using Baha'i sources that actually brings to light the place or the role that these Baha'is, these Baha'i lands, played in the development of the Zionist movement in the Land of Israel or in Palestine. Yes, please.
In one of your slides, you mentioned about the connection of the Baha'is with foreign powers,
yes,
as possible influence of the progress of these schools.
Yes. Not the progress. I said maybe the influence of those powers on the statement, the Qajar statement, in order to permit the opening of the schools.
Right. So, as I'm sure you know, currently the Iranian government accuses the Baha'is of being agents of
Israel, Russia, yes.
United States, Russia, even Israel,
yes.
and so on. So, in your research, basically, could you elaborate on the nature of this relationship? Was it mainly educational, sociological, or have you found any evidence of any kind of a political machination or Baha'is being agents of any of these things?
Well, not agents, but for example, you take for somebody that I wrote an entry for the Iranica on the Haji Mirza Muhammad Taghi Shirazi Afnan. He was one of the major merchants in the second half of 19th century in Iran. A good friend and I would say somebody who on a regular basis corresponded with Amin al-Zab, the leading merchant of the period, who was involved in establishing these councils of merchants, Majalis Tajarat, was a leading role. And he became, in the 1870s, the Russians picked him up to become their agent, their consul in Yazd. And he was for 10 years Russian consul in Yazd, and he was therefore given the title of Vakil al-Dawleh Rus. And so he was an agent, but agent in salary, not agent as a secret agent. I mean, he was working openly, and he served the interests of Russia because of his post, of course, in that area. But also he knew how to use it for his own, being a merchant, an international merchant that has business in Ashgabat and also Central Asia, for his own purposes as well. So, for example, there is a theft of some of his commodity in Russia. He sends a letter to the authorities of Transcaspia, the Russian authorities of Transcaspia, and then what was before Turkestan, then became Transcaspia, and then Central Asia, and asking for protection, for asking them to do whatever they can to reimburse what has been stolen. So there is this kind of arrangement. I won't call them agents in a way that you indicated. Of course, they're saying that the Baha'is are being in Haifa, they're agents of the Zionists. So they say. They say a lot of things, as we know. You don't have to be, They have the chutzpah, how do you say in English? They have the chutzpah to be involved in Syria and in Iraq to kill civilians, but they attack the Saudis they calling genocide of the Yemenis. So these are the hypocrisy that we live in. Yes, please.
You mentioned that at the end of 19th century, maybe 10% of population were Baha'i.
No, what I said is that there is a range.
Between 1% and 10%, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, before 1979, how many percent of the population of Iran was Baha'i? And my feeling was that they were not so many. What happened during this period is that
Up to 1979?
Yes, from 1930 to 79. What happened with the Baha'i population?
Well, this is kind of an enigma also, because if you look during the Pahlavi period, I think Professor Milali will agree, when you look at the number of Baha'is, for decades it's 300,000. That's what you hear all the time. So I say, I don't think that every Baha'i family has 2 kids, and when the father and parents die, and so they replace each other. So, so in my view, there is, you have to take it as part of the growth of the population. So if the population grows, then I assume that the number of Baha'is also have grown. To some extent, I think that the Baha'i World Center probably doesn't have the interest to publish the exact figure, if they know the exact figure. I don't know, but I think they need to keep it in order not to make it like a bigger danger for the regime. So, but in my own feeling as a follower of the issues, I think we are talking about much more. Probably after the 1971, even more so, because of the distance created between the population and the regime, because of what the population actually distance itself from Islam as well, because of they identify the crimes of the regime with Islam. So therefore, there's a great move to Zoroastrianism, to Christianity, and I think also to the Baha'i faith, because the principles of Baha'ism are very, I would say, principles that many the young generation Iranians are appeal to them. But of course, they won't come and say we are Baha'is because of many reasons, including execution or deprivation of higher education and stuff like that. Yes?
And are Baha'i respect, do Baha'i respect the Islamic holidays generally, like Muharram and so on? I don't know.
Yeah, well, the Baha'is by faith, they respect the local habits and holidays, but they have their own. So, I mean, they still obedient to the state rules, because this is part of their faith, to be obedient to the state, no matter this is a state that actually kills them or persecutes them. Still, yes, please.
Could you comment about what your, I mean, you mentioned about modernity in Iran and how basically the educational attitude to people came about, but you emphasized that Baha'is emphasize a lot on education. Can you comment about how who and how they basically became so emphasizing so much on education, and at what period was that?
Well, they always emphasize education because it's part of the faith, but
did Bab was that, or did Baha'u'llah was that?
It was more Baha'u'llah, and more so because Baha'u'llah died in 1892. So it was more, if you talk about modern education, it was mainly Abdul Baha. That was actually the engine that pushed towards establishing those schools. Still, because of what I said, the period of late 19th century when Abdul Baha was the leader of the Baha'i community, it was more a period that was ripe for establishing those schools, as I said, from obscurity to the open, because of the period was more, people were more open to change. The winds of change that came from Europe, there was a movement towards constitutionalism, anti-absolutism in Iran. So all these things probably brought him to decide to move on. And there was a need also from, as I said, for modern education. Then all these combined probably helped the decision to establish such schools. And the result is that he was right, because most of them were attended by many non-Baha'is.
Well, our time is up. Please join me in thanking Professor